Hey folks, welcome to my channel where I talk about interesting tech careers beyond software engineering and how to get them. For those of you new here, my name is Divya and I'm a program manager lead at Google, and I'm here to help you get closer to your dream job at a tech company which is both fulfilling as well as well paid. Today I'm going to talk to you about behavioral interviews and how to crack them. In the last two videos, we spoke about hypothetical interview-based questions as well as role-related interviews, so check that out if you already haven't. But in this one, the interviews are going to be looking out for your past experiences and how you've handled situations in the past. So this is a time when you get to talk about your stories. Your first thought might be, oh, what's so difficult if I just have to talk about my own stories? But that's where you need to rethink again, because these are frequently interviews where candidates can go haywire, lose structure, and do not do very well on their interviews. In these kind of interviews, the interviewer is looking for two broad things. One, how you problem solve, and two, how you problem solve with people. So there could be questions which will test either both of these, one of these, and you'll get a sense of what they're testing based on the tips that I give you below. Also, please hit that subscribe button. Every notification makes my day. It is difficult for anyone to come up with on-the-spot stories which are well structured as well as are meaningful to the question that the interviewer is asking, right? So how do you prepare for those in advance? My advice over here is, first, list down every key project that you've worked on in the past. If you're a new grad, look out for class projects, look out for case competitions that you might have worked on, or just any other kind of like activities that you might have done in your college, like say working in a festival, organizing a workshop or a research conference, and so on and so forth. Once you list down these key projects, next step is to ask 7 key questions about each of these projects. And I know it sounds like a bit of work, but believe me, it's going to make your life super easy. So those 7 questions are essentially the 7 W's. First, what happened? Second, why did it matter? Third, what did you do? Fourth, what did it lead to? Fifth, what went wrong? Sixth, what went right? And seventh, what did you learn from all of this? I know your first thought might be, oh, this sounds like a lot of work, but believe me when I say this will prepare you for pretty much any behavioral question that you might encounter, because this 7W framework captures all of those situations very, very effectively. And you'll have a story for each question that your interviewer might ask you and make you super well prepared and super well structured when you're approaching any behavioral interview. I did this personally when I was approaching my Google interviews. I did this even while I was preparing for my B school. And what it leads to is a corpus of questions and answers that you can always refer back to, and you can use them in any situation as you want. And this corpus only grows more and more as you progress in your career. So it will help you even while you're looking to switch jobs, move into a new career, and so on and so forth, because behavioral questions are integral to any tech management interviews that you will face in your career. So as we spoke about, there are two broad kind of things that they're looking for, right? The one is people related, on how you problem solve in a team. So the questions that you could expect over here could be on the lines of, let's assume there are 3 new team members who have joined your team, but you are the person who's most experienced with that particular team. How do you go about ramping them up at the same time meeting your own goals? Another question could be on the lines of, let's assume that you're working on a particular program and there's a team member or a stakeholder who doesn't necessarily agree with you. How do you go about making sure that the program still happens and you work with that particular stakeholder in a meaningful way? The second is the problem solving interviews, where the interviewer is looking for how you've approached problems in the past. So these are not hypothetical questions that we spoke about earlier, but these are questions where they're looking for your ability in the past and what kind of results it led to. So hypotheticals over here could include things like, let's assume that you're working on a new program which is in a completely different domain than one you have expertise in. How did you go about gathering the right amount of information in a way that you could still approach this problem in a meaningful way, and how did that program eventually go? Second could be on the lines of, can you tell me about a time when your program did much better than you expected it to? What did you learn from it? Why did your expectation differ from how it eventually turned out to be? All right, so let's do this with a sample question, and I'm going to keep giving you tips as well as my sample answer when we are approaching this problem. So let's assume the question is, can you tell me about a time when you were working on a project where someone did not agree with you, but you still had to launch it? How did you go about doing that in a way that the program still got launched? I was working on a project where there was a particular stakeholder group from which I needed to get a policy exemption to be able to still launch. And I needed their approval to move forward the launch, but it was not possible because the stakeholder group had never seen this kind of work stream before, because this was one of a kind in the group. And since they hadn't seen this situation before or this kind of policy exemption, they needed more time to work through their standard operating procedure and formalize this before they could even approve our launch. So this gives your interviewer a good sense of what was the overall situation like and kind of a bit of the gravity of it. It was critical because there were a certain number of clients that were relying on it, and this was very important to meet those particular goals and also to make sure that you could deliver on time. Now, this lays out why it mattered very, very clearly. My approach to this problem was, first I familiarized myself with the existing policies and where did we miss the mark? Essentially, where that delta between what the expectation of the approval team was and what our situation was. Next, I familiarized myself with the parameters that this particular team typically looks out for and making sure that we are still able to meet those parameters even while we are seeking this policy exemption. Next, I met with the stakeholders to deeply understand what their key issues and concerns were, and I learned that what really was mattering to them was there's this particular risk parameter that we were not mitigating according to this approval process because we were seeking this exemption which would have typically been covered in their evaluation process. And secondly, if we really had to override this risk parameter, we needed to get some form of executive sign-off because this was a policy exemption that they had not seen before. Now that we know that this particular team is worried about this ABC risk and the executive sign-off, I made a case around measuring this risk very, very effectively through a certain set of metrics, and then made sure that we had a evaluation plan to constantly measure this risk and have a rollback or a fallback plan on what happens if we particularly miss the risk threshold that this team has prescribed. Because accountability was very critical for this team to make this policy exemption, I worked with my manager and my executive leadership to give them a very detailed overview of what our mitigation strategy was, how we're going to be measuring this risk constantly, and what our fallback plan was. With this, my executive leadership felt very comfortable to sign off on this process, and they made sure to communicate with the executive leadership of this stakeholder team so that we could inculcate this as a new process going further, because this accountability was time being and it was the responsibility of this team to make sure they could also work with these exceptional cases in the future. The impact of this project was immense because one, it led to increased revenue for the company. Second, it led to maintaining our relationships with our key clients who were going to be using this project. And third, it led to the initiation of a new process for these kind of work streams which are new and they are going to be requiring policy exemptions in the company even in the future. What went well for us apart from the impact of this project was that we were able to convince the stakeholder group that there is this particular use case that's going to be critical for our team so that they could have bandwidth on their side to make sure they're able to manage these policy exemptions in the future by having a very robust process. We did this by giving an estimate of the frequency with which they can expect such kind of requests from us, which would help them staff their team better for these kind of exceptions. What we could have done better and what we learned from this entire situation was that we could have involved our executive leadership from both sides, not just from one side, even earlier, and made sure that the accountability gaps were very, very clear to both the teams. And this is something that I'll take forward to my future programs as well. Alright, I hope that mock interview was helpful for you to figure out how to use this 7W framework in real life, and I hope you take the time to prepare for your behavioral questions by evaluating each of your past experience and your project across the 7W framework, and you're going to ace that behavioral interview and get that dream job that you want. If you have any thoughts on the 7W framework and what additions we could make to it, please leave a comment below. I'd be very happy to hear your feedback. If you thought this was helpful, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.